Since the October 7, 2023 Hamas-led attacks on Israel, protests have erupted across Columbia. Demonstrators on and off campus have protested against Israel's military campaign in Gaza and the university's investments in companies tied to Israel, and in support of hostages taken by Hamas. As tensions escalated, Columbia's campus has made international headlines. Spectator documented dozens of protests, as well as many related events that have influenced the movement's trajectory. As demonstrations continue in the new semester, here is a non-exhaustive timeline featuring some of the biggest protests over the last 12 months. The first large-scale protests were held on October 12, 2023, with hundreds of pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel protesters staging opposite demonstrations. The protests were organized by Columbia's chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, and Students Supporting Israel, each of which would become key players in the following months of protests. From the beginning, many pro-Palestinian protesters chose to wear masks to protect themselves against doxing, especially after the conservative media group Accuracy in Media displayed the names and faces of affiliates who were allegedly part of organizations that signed a controversial Palestinian solidarity statement. Once the pro-Palestinian movement was underway, many pro-Israel students at Columbia began raising concerns about anti-Semitism on campus, citing anti-Zionist chants from demonstrators. After hundreds gathered for a November protest, the university suspended SJP and JVP, citing violations of on-campus event policy. While the groups remained unofficially active, Columbia University Apartheid Divest, a coalition of over 100 student organizations, reactivated to begin organizing student demonstrations. At times, protests sought to disrupt major campus events. During Columbia's annual tree lighting celebration, dozens rallied, holding up signs declaring, "Joy is canceled." Tensions were already mounting in the first days of the spring semester. At a Divestment Now rally on Low Steps, an individual sprayed more than a dozen protesters with a foul-smelling substance. Multiple protesters reported seeking medical treatment. Students also reported being called Jew killers and terrorists by counter-protesters. Barnard President Laura Rosenberry's inauguration in Riverside Church was met with several disruptions from protesters, who periodically heckled Rosenberry and were then escorted out. After the inauguration, hundreds gathered outside the Columbia gates for an All Out for Palestine rally, which was organized partly in response to the chemical spray incident days prior. The event was heavily guarded by New York Police Department officers, who arrested multiple students. Dozens of pro-Israel protesters gathered at the Sundial for a Rally for Our Existence demonstration. Organized by SSI, the event was one of the few official pro-Israel protests held during the 2023-24 school year. CUAD held an unauthorized Resistance 101 panel featuring speakers from prominent pro-Palestinian organizations. The event received backlash, particularly due to a speech by Khaled Barakat, who is allegedly a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a group designated by the U.S. government as a terrorist organization. Columbia launched an investigation with an outside firm shortly after the event and suspended several students for their involvement. Amid increased scrutiny from Congress in the weeks leading up to former university president Manoush Shafiq's testimony before the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, university delegates handed out pamphlets during an unauthorized All Out for Al-Shifa protest by the Sundial. The pamphlet requested that demonstrators stop the event and show ID, threatening suspension if they did not comply. Hours before Shafiq testified in Washington, D.C., protesters set up a Gaza Solidarity encampment on South Lawn. After telling Congress that the university had absolutely no hesitation in enforcing our policies, Shafiq authorized the NYPD to sweep the encampment the following day. Officers arrested over 100 protesters, sparking outcry from many students and faculty. Within minutes of the arrested students being removed from campus, students began occupying the opposite lawn. Following widespread backlash from the university community, the administration said that it did not plan to call the NYPD to campus again to disperse the encampments. In the days that followed, encampments began spreading to universities across the world, with Columbia at the center of the movement. The protests drew condemnation from alumni and politicians alike, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, who visited campus on April 24th and was met with cheers from students. Reports of anti-Semitism both on and around campus proliferated when the encampment began, including incidents where pro-Israel protesters were told to go back to Poland and were said to be Hamas's next target. Throughout the encampment, pro-Palestinian Jewish students held religious events, including Shabbat dinners and a Passover Seder. While day-to-day life in the encampment was largely peaceful, and at times even mundane, tensions continued to escalate, with protests on and around campus occurring regularly. On April 25th, hundreds rallied outside university gates for a United for Israel march, organized by the nonprofit Stand With Us and multiple right-wing media figures. Spectator reported numerous incidents of harassment and inflammatory language. Throughout the encampment's existence, university administrators negotiated with pro-Palestinian organizers to disperse the encampment. On Monday, April 29th, the last day of classes for the semester, both sides announced that negotiations had fallen through. In an email to the student body, Shafiq declared that anyone remaining in the encampment by 2 p.m. Monday afternoon would be suspended. By that night, protests were still going strong despite passing the deadline to disperse. Then, at about 12:30 a.m. on April 30th, dozens of protesters breached and occupied Hamilton Hall, renaming the building Hind's Hall in honor of Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old Palestinian girl killed by the Israeli military. Hundreds more rallied around campus and formed barricades outside the building's entrances. Columbia, and Hamilton in particular, has a long history of student activism. Protesters have taken over Hamilton 6 times in the past 60 years, most notably in 1968 to protest the Vietnam War. Following a day of protest outside Columbia's gates, police entered campus at 9 p.m. and swept Hamilton exactly 56 years after protesters were removed from the building during the anti-Vietnam War protests. The NYPD also disassembled the Gaza Solidarity encampment for the second time in 2 weeks, leaving only the imprints of tents on the grass. Several accounts would later arise of police brutality and misconduct against students, with many having to go to the hospital for their injuries. In one instance, a protester was thrown down the stairs in front of the building. One officer accidentally fired a gun inside Hamilton. After one of the most tumultuous days in recent memory, the university continued to severely restrict campus access, and the heavy NYPD presence on campus continued. Shafiq soon announced that commencement would be canceled and class days would be moved off campus. Campus activism quieted during the summer months, though a third Revolt for Rafah encampment did spring up for a reunion weekend while alumni visited campus. Shafiq announced her resignation from her role as university president weeks before the fall semester began. Interim university president Katrina Armstrong took over the role and soon apologized to students hurt by the NYPD's April sweeps of the encampment in Hamilton Hall. Dozens of protesters began the 2024-25 year by picketing outside university gates on the first day of fall semester classes. SJP later announced a series of teach-ins that would occur throughout the semester, and also held a sit-in in the International Affairs Building and multiple study-ins in Butler Library. Dozens of faculty members gathered for a Community in Crisis teach-in on Barnard's campus. Speakers included both faculty and alumni, who accused Barnard of stifling free speech through a number of policies over the past year, including the recent expectations for community conduct. Tensions were further strained when Israel launched its military campaign in Lebanon, prompting an all-out for Lebanon protest. Dozens rallied by the sundial following Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations General Assembly the same morning. Students gathered at Low Steps for a vigil honoring Palestinians killed by the Israeli military, and continued holding ceremonies throughout the week. After mourners adorned alma mater with pro-Palestinian flags, the university fenced off the statue. After a year of turmoil and the university's continued refusal to meet protesters' demands, protests at Columbia remained ongoing.